The Habsburgs, one of the most powerful dynasties of all time. As German kings, as emperors of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, and most recently as emperors of Austria and kings of Hungary, they shaped the course of European history for centuries. As kings of Spain, they ruled over a new world empire in which the sun did not set. A sphere of influence that stretched from North Africa and reached as far as California. A combination of artful diplomacy and ruthless power politics turned an insignificant ducal family into a world-class dynasty. The Habsburgs waged wars and made marriage alliances with the same fervor, securing their influence and tying their fortunes to the significant noble families of Europe. Sometimes they took land and titles by force, but often they were just lucky enough to outlive their rivals. From the beginning of the 13th century, the Habsburgs continuously expanded their rule from their homeland in the west of the Holy Roman Empire. They began to move east to the region of present-day Austria, then to Bohemia and Hungary. Later, large regions and nations such as the Netherlands, Burgundy, Castile, and Aragon were added. Whole nations were defined and later subsumed in the course of history. Others were ruled by the dynasty for many centuries. After the tumult of the First World War, the Habsburg Empire disappeared forever. But to this day, many countries, cities, and regions are shaped by their time within its culture. Castles and palaces, monasteries and art collections remind us of this once so powerful dynasty. We will now travel through time to the most important locations that defined the Habsburgs. A journey that leads through more than a dozen present-day European states and back to the world more than 1,000 years ago. Following his decisive victory over Ottokar of Bohemia in 1278, King Rudolf I began to establish his rule in Central Europe. He installed his sons Albrecht and Rudolf as Dukes of Austria and Styria, and rewarded supporter Meinhard II with an imperial title, control of Carinthia, and the Duchy of Carniola. The full Duchy of Carinthia did not fall to the Habsburgs until 1335, followed shortly by the County of Tyrol. By 1365, Rudolf had effectively established Habsburg power across the southeast of the empire. The Benedictine Abbey of St. Paul in the Levant Valley holds an important place in the story of the Habsburgs in the Eastern Alps. In addition to other burial sites, the Collegiate Church is also the final resting place of the Spanheimers, an old Frankish ruling family.
The dukes in Carinthia, the Spanheimers, founded the monastery in 1091, also as a burial place for their own family. Today, the Spanheimers are buried next to the Habsburgs in the Collegiate Church. And there have always been points of contact, be it through disputes with the Habsburgs, but also the protection of the monastery. The Spanheimers were replaced by the Meinhardingers, who were ultimately replaced by the Habsburgs. So the Spanheimers are, in a sense, the ancestors of the Habsburgs as Dukes of Carinthia.
The donor's fresco in the left aisle depicts Duke Engelbert I, who founded the monastery. St. Paul's Abbey is one of the most important cultural centers in the country. A large part of the art collections and the monastery library come from the monastery of St. Blasian in the Black Forest, which was dissolved after the fall of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806.
St. Blasian had one of the most important German treasure collections at its disposal. And with the dissolution of the monastery, the convent naturally took its possessions with it. And the treasures they brought back are of European standing. This ranges from the most important manuscripts that we have preserved today. From the 5th century to the 18th century, the evolution of the art of writing can be documented without gaps. From Gutenberg's first printed page to important examples of the goldsmith's art, such as the Adelaide Cross or the Emperor's Chalice from the 15th century.
Monasteries were of great importance to sovereigns because monks knew how to read and write. Before the invention of the printing press, all important charters and documents were written down and copied in the scriptoria of the monasteries.
That was also the intention of the Habsburgs, to promote the monasteries. Since monasteries have always been considered repositories of knowledge and education, thus, the monastic libraries are still repositories of collected knowledge of the various centuries and also of the various fields of knowledge, from medicine to geography to astrophysics to theology and philosophy, the various topics that are threaded here on shelves. And the monasteries were always commissioned in their scriptoria to copy the important works of history, to make them accessible to a broad public, to teach history in their schools, and thus also to contribute to the fact that the old, especially prehistory, antiquity, was saved from the Middle Ages into modern times.
A journey through time to the places where the Habsburgs lived and ruled will always lead to Vienna. Not particularly loved by early emperors such as Frederick III or Maximilian I, Vienna developed over the centuries into the most important and ultimately only residence of the Habsburgs. It's actually possible to trace the history of the Habsburgs through the art and artifacts from the Middle Ages to modern times, held in the treasury of the Vienna Imperial Palace.
In the
Vienna treasury, we have the most important coronation treasure in Europe. This is the only surviving collection of garments, insignia, and symbols of power in the general sense of the Middle Ages that we have preserved here in the Western world. These include textiles that have suffered particularly over the centuries, especially where they have been used again and again. So it's a small miracle that we have preserved this regalia with the robe, the alba, and the tonicella. Various components in this quality and in this condition, although they were used a lot or were used again and again at intervals, and therefore, of course, also suffered and had to be restored many times.
Among the symbols of power, the full imperial regalia, the scepter, the orb, the coronation robes, and the crown. There have been many crowns in the course of history, but none so awe-inspiring with such mythic status as the imperial crown. Legend has it that Charlemagne wore it. External signs were of great symbolic power and important in order to legitimize claims to power and to make them visible to the outside world.
The imperial crown is indeed one of the most important political symbols in the history of Europe over the last 1,000 years. The vast majority of crowns have been lost, simply because they were later reworked or melted down. This crown has actually been used for many centuries as the crown at the coronations of the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire.
The interdisciplinary research project, The Crown, is now intended to shed light on how old the imperial crown actually is and how often it has been revised. For this purpose, for example, the goldsmith's work is examined or chemical analyses of the alloy and the enamel work are carried out. What is certain is that in 1792, Francis II was the last Habsburg to be crowned Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation with this crown.
The astonishing thing is that we can only actually prove the use of the crown with 100% certainty in the 15th century. This means that the evidence only begins with Frederick III, who was crowned in Aachen in 1442. And we know that simply because there are sources, because there are documents. There is a letter in which he specifically asked the city of Nuremberg, where the crown was already kept at that time, to send it to Aachen. The
imperial insignia were not always kept in the Viennese treasury. A search for traces leads to Karlstein in the Czech Republic. The mighty castle was founded by Emperor Charles IV after his election as King of the Holy Roman Empire in 1346.
Karlstein really is one of the most important castles, although its current appearance does not quite correspond to the Gothic one from the time of Charles IV. Charles IV planned Karlstein really as a shrine for the imperial crown jewels, but also as an important sacred place. There is the Chapel of the Holy Cross, where the jewels were stored and where many of the relics of the saints were kept. So the place has both a spiritual and also a political dimension. Later on, at the time of the reign of the Habsburgs under Ferdinand I, but even before that, the crown jewels of the Kingdom of Bohemia, as well as an important archive, were kept here. So, in fact, the most important documents of the Kingdom of Bohemia were stored at Karlstein.
Inside the castle, there is now a museum with an ancestral hall, where the portraits of important Czech kings are exhibited. After the 30 Years' War, the castle fell into ruins. It was not until the Emperor Franz I and his son Ferdinand that it was rebuilt in the 19th century and received its current appearance. For Bohemia, the reign of Charles IV was something of a golden age. Charles, who was born in Prague and originally baptized with the Czech name Wenceslav, is still considered one of the most influential rulers of his time. Many buildings in Prague date back to Charles IV. The Charles Bridge remains one of the most beautiful landmarks of the city. During his reign, the first German university was founded, and construction work began on the Gothic St. Vitus Cathedral on Prague's Castle Hill. Under Emperor Charles IV, Prague developed into one of the most important intellectual and cultural centers, not just of Bohemia, but in the Holy Roman Empire.
Charles IV also managed to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor in Rome, so he was undoubtedly a very mature political figure, and he was a skilled diplomat. It is said that he sought to achieve his territorial gains by peaceful means, by negotiation. His diplomatic activities were astonishing. The cultural connections of Charles IV are also important. On the one hand, he had grown up at the French royal court, but he also knew Italy and the German land. And he had a close connection to the Czech heritage of the Přemysliv dynasty.
St. Vitus Cathedral is also the burial place of numerous Bohemian princes, kings, and Roman German emperors. In a side chapel lie the remains of one of the earliest princes of the Přemysliv dynasty, Wenceslaus of Bohemia. While Charles IV gradually developed Prague into a beautiful residential city, his Habsburg son-in-law in Vienna, Duke Rudolf IV, watched his father-in-law's ambitions with growing jealousy.
In any case, Rudolf IV was also often in Prague, and it is said that he was inspired, whether positively or negatively, by the example of his imperial father-in-law. I might even call it that. It was a kind of jealous, anxious imitation of something that was probably unattainable for Rudolf IV. Because, as we know, Charles was emperor. He was also the king of Bohemia and owned numerous large and rich estates. At that time, Austria was simply one of many territories of the empire. Rudolf IV, on the other hand, was only a duke, not even entitled to the title of archduke. So I would say that Charles was a very strong inspiration for Rudolf, but he couldn't really compete with Charles. Rather, he tried to emulate Charles very, very intensively.
Closely related to each other, a rivalry soon developed between two of Europe's great cities, Prague and Vienna, driven by the ambition of the young Duke Rudolf IV. Since the middle of the 19th century, Vienna has been a city engineered for imperial splendor. It was to be the final flourish before the fall of the Habsburg monarchy only a few decades later. In the first district of the city, we still see the narrow alleys and streets reminiscent of the narrow medieval Vienna before their arrival. The heart and landmark of Vienna is St. Stephen's Cathedral, the stone symbol of Rudolf's efforts to emulate his father-in-law in Prague. When constructed, it towered over the then quite small city of Vienna. With its low houses, the cathedral with its south tower still towers over the Danube metropolis even today, visible from afar. Rudolf, also called the Founder by historians, did not miss the opportunity to lay the foundation for the South Tower and the Gothic extension of St. Stephen's Cathedral on the 7th of April, 1359. Today, St. Stephen's Cathedral is not only a tourist attraction, but continues to be an important center of faith for people from all over the world. Cathedral priest Tony Faber regularly celebrates Holy Mass here. When Tony Faber thinks of the Habsburgs, especially the creative will of Rudolf the Founder, he sees firsthand the inheritance it has left.
Historically, we can be immensely grateful to the House of Habsburg. St. Stephen's Cathedral would not exist without Habsburg. Of course, Duke Rudolf IV, the founder, did a tremendous job. It fascinates me that a young person has such grandiose thoughts, to the point of being a bit of a megalomaniac. It is this fascination that he died at the age of 27 and yet left behind something lasting. The Gothic-style church has been rebuilt, and I am immensely grateful to Emperor Frederick III, who is also in my heart and in my eyes every day when I enter the cathedral. And whenever I am to be buried right next to the ducal crypt, this close connection with the House of Habsburg will continue beyond my death.
Duke Rudolf IV, whom we call the Founder, is of immense interest to St. Stephen. In 1359, he laid the foundation stone for the Gothic extension of St. Stephen's, as it is said, with his own hand and silver utensils. The South Tower of St. Stephen, the symbol of this city, the famous Staffel, is, so to speak, the most important project of Rudolf IV. And he made sure that his memory was kept alive here in this church, to which his whole love belonged, as he himself said. In 1363, on the occasion of his brother's early death, he had the ducal crypt built directly under the high altar and above it, the so-called God Corpse altar, the high grave on which the reclining figures of his wife Katharina and himself lie, and on which he had himself depicted. St. Stephen's Cathedral is one of the most important Gothic buildings in Europe. The entire western part, on the other hand, dates back to the older Romanesque construction phase. In the gallery, there are murals depicting Jesus with John and other saints. In the Apostle Choir is the monumental tomb of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III. The emperor had died in Linz in 1493 at the ripe old age of 78. 20 years later, his body was finally laid to rest here. In addition to Duke Rudolf, the founder, his great-nephew, Emperor Frederick III, is the most famous Habsburg to have found his final resting place in St. Stephen's Cathedral. Emperor Frederick lies in the Apostle Choir and the South Choir of St. Stephen in the famous High Tomb, the largest and most important imperial grave north of the Alps, as it is always called in literature. A tomb which had been in the works for over 50 years and which was not completed until 20 years after the death of the emperor. The tombstone depicts the emperor in coronation regalia with the imperial orb and scepter. Also to be read are the letters A-E-I-O-U, an abbreviation for Frederick's motto, the meaning of which has been puzzling for over half a millennium. Presumably, they stand for Amor electis in justis ordinor ultor. I am loved by the chosen. For the unjust, I am ordained an avenger. Numerous rumors and legends also surround the catacombs under St. Stephen's Cathedral. Everything that is underground, everything that is called catacombs, inspires people's imagination. There is not only a story to be told about it, but a lot of gossip too. Supposedly, the Templars still meet in the catacombs today. The Freemasons have their premises down here, and there is a counterfeiting workshop in the catacombs under the cathedral. I couldn't discover any of this, and there is no record of it. A persistent rumor that continues to this day is that there was a mass plague grave in the so-called new part under St. Stephen's Square of the catacombs. This may not be such a rumor, as this room is full of bones that were thrown down here in a disorderly manner. Here in the Cathedral Archive of St. Stephen, there are the books of the dead and the funeral books from this time. They are completely preserved, and if you study them through, you will not come across a single burial of plague dead in the catacombs of St. Stephen's. During the epidemic in 1679, 3 plague victims were buried in the old Stephen's Cemetery, which was located where St. Stephen's Square is today, and was closed in 1732. Among the numerous art treasures in St. Stephen's Cathedral are stained glass windows, which are among the most important picture cycles of medieval stained glass in Europe. The Habsburg panes in the Bartholomew Chapel.
The Habsburg windows was a political program of really enormous dimensions, which seemed not too big for Duke Rudolf IV. He has commissioned the artist to create a real genealogy here, which leads from the 3 kings via other kings directly to the Habsburgs. For him, the effort was to really show in the history of salvation of Christianity that the Habsburg family wanted to take on a very special role to create something lasting, and that has remained, even if some of the Habsburgs' undertakings would no longer be imaginable today.
A visit to Vienna in the footsteps of the Habsburgs also takes many guests to the Capuchin Crypt in Vienna's city center. From the early 17th century, it has been the largest and most important burial place of the Habsburgs. It was founded by Emperor Matthias and his wife, Anna.
Emperor Ferdinand III was the first after Anna and Matthias. He lost many family members. 2 wives died quite early, along with many children. And he asked the Capuchins if there was still a place available. There was only this founder's crypt. There wasn't much space yet, and then they said yes, they can see if there is space. It was a bit narrow then, but his son and successor, Emperor Leopold I, decided that he had to expand, otherwise it would be too small. Also, the proximity to the Imperial Palace made this a practical burial site for the Habsburgs, and as a result, the crypt gradually expanded, with successive emperors and empresses having it extended.
So far, 150 members of the House of Habsburg have found their final resting place in the Capuchin Crypt. The coffins are a good illustration of the fashions of the time. At the center of the crypt is the huge Baroque coffin of Maria Theresa and her husband, Franz Stephan of Lorraine.
Maria Theresa was also the only one who had the crypt open to the people. So the crypt was no longer only a private cemetery. From that point on, it was a symbolic stage for the people. We are the Habsburgs. This is what we want to express. And that was also the time when you could see on the coffins, there's more variety. It's becoming more biographical. A coffin was more than just a burial place for a deceased person. In the Baroque period, symbolism plays a very important role, so everything that is written on the coffins always has some special meaning. Very important, for example, is the skull, which is always depicted with some defects, for example, without teeth, without lower jaw, because the emperor wanted to express his personal mortality in this way. It is an obvious contrast. Even if he is more important in his lifetime, much more important than any peasants, in death we are all equal. There was a very strong break after the Baroque period from the time of Emperor Joseph II onwards. He clearly distanced himself from his more Baroque-influenced mother and said, all these extras, all this frippery, he doesn't need any of that. It has to be just good, simple, and he didn't want to create a stage around this anymore. He thought it was ridiculous, even at his coronation. When he was crowned king and then emperor, it was always a Punch and Judy show for him.
One tradition he didn't break from was a macabre peculiarity in the funeral rite of the Habsburgs, where the burial of body, heart, and intestines were all separate. This was practiced over a long period of time.
Many Habsburgs decided that they wanted to be divided into three, which meant that the corpse would be divided into heart, intestines, and bone. The hearts went to the Augustinian Church, the entrails to St. Stephen's Cathedral, and the bones are buried here with us. The idea behind it was of religious nature. People thought that if they were distributed in different places of worship, more people would pray for them, and their soul had a better chance to find salvation.
One of the most important places of remembrance of the Habsburgs in Austria is the castle of Wiener Neustadt. Emperor Frederick III chose it as his residence, and his son, the future Emperor Maximilian, was born and buried in St. George's Cathedral. Maximilian had various plans for his burial. He considered the Cathedral of Speyer as well as Innsbruck, where he had a monumental tomb erected. In the end, however, he wanted to be buried like a penitent, so he had his hair shaved and his teeth knocked out. St. George's Cathedral and the castle were badly damaged during World War II and rebuilt after the war. During that time, the enigmatic inscription of Emperor Friedrich, AEIOU, was found in many places in the castle of Wiener Neustadt. Emperor Maximilian rarely stayed in Wiener Neustadt, and as a result, the castle lost its significance as an imperial residence. In 1751, Maria Theresa designated the castle as the site for the aristocratic cadet house, from which the Theresian Military Academy, the oldest military school in the world, emerged. Emperor Maximilian chose Innsbruck as his residence and had the local imperial palace expanded accordingly. In the court church next to the castle is the tomb originally intended for Maximilian and commissioned by him. It was to be installed at St. George's Cathedral in Wiener Neustadt, but after Maximilian's choice of a penitent's burial was not brought to Innsbruck until many years after his death.
Innsbruck was also discussed as a burial place for the emperor. However, he has already stipulated in his will that he would like to be buried in Wiener Neustadt, in the castle where he grew up as a disciple. What goes back to him here in Innsbruck very concretely is this tomb concept, which can be seen in the court church. It is these larger-than-life bronze figures that can be seen there. This is an idea that Maximilian developed during his lifetime. On the one hand, these are both his ancestors, but also relatives who are still alive. These are relatives by marriage and representatives of familial dynasties from all over Europe. This is very exciting. People whose ideas had been considered representative and important. So there is a figure of King Arthur, the mythical British king, who can be considered a kind of paragon of chivalrous virtue. Then there is the figure of Godfrey of Bouillon, who played a very important role in the Crusades, the first to bear the title King of Jerusalem. We have Chlodwig, the king of the Franks, who was the first king of the Franks to convert to Christianity, and so on. In other words, they are people who were considered worthy of imitation. And the whole thing intends to establish ruling legitimacy by going back to ancient models and by simply consolidating and underpinning the claim of one's own dynasty.
Dass man den Anspruch der eigenen Dynastie damit einfach festigt und untermauert.
Maximilian had a special affinity for Tyrol and Innsbruck, not only because of his passion for hunting. Maximilian has left a whole series of traces in Tyrol. The cityscape of Innsbruck with the landmark par excellence, the Golden Roof, dates back to Maximilian I. But there are also completely different things that moved Maximilian in Tyrol and that kept his presence in Tyrol present to this day. The importance of Schwaz as a mining town, the silver chamber of the empire, so to speak, was also closely connected to Maximilian. During this time, politics was very often pursued through military actions, not only by the Habsburgs. And this devours vast amounts of money. And so a region rich in silver, like the one in Schwaz, would provide a lot of income and was very important. By the end of the 15th century, the Habsburg territories in the Holy Roman Empire had expanded enormously through clever marriage and successful wars. To this day, Emperor Maximilian I is considered one of the most important rulers of the House of Habsburg. But representative courts, weddings, and wars were expensive, and Maximilian depended on advisors and confidants on whom he could rely. Rodeneck Castle, high above the Puster Valley in South Tyrol, is one of the mightiest fortifications in the country. Built on a prominent rock above the Rheims Gorge, it was virtually impregnable in the Middle Ages. The castle is particularly interesting because it also evokes the story of a friendship between one of the most powerful men of his time and one of his most loyal vassals.
As a caretaker, there was already a member of the family of Wolkenstein sitting there. This was Oswald II of Wolkenstein, the son of the famous minstrel Oswald von Wolkenstein. His son, Veit, was actually a confidant and counsel of the Habsburgs since his youth. And in 1491, in gratitude for this close connection, which could perhaps also be described as friendship, Maximilian gave his counselor, Veit von Wolkenstein, the castle and the court of Rodeneck.
Julia Thurn und Taxis is a specialist in medieval history at the University of Innsbruck and has dealt intensively with the history of Rodeneck Castle, where she also lives in summer.
In the 13th century, there was also a real push to promote the arts at the royal court. And this is why Rodeneck has actually become very famous internationally. Here lie the Wiener frescoes in the old Romanesque core of the castle. There you will find a rather small room with a profane picture cycle, which shows scenes from the Wiener epic. That is unique in itself, but it also shows the international networking of such families within a European context.
The frescoes depict the adventures of Ewain, a knight of the Round Table at the court of the legendary King Arthur. Perhaps they also impressed Emperor Maximilian, who was a lover of chivalrous virtues. Maximilian also loved hunting. At Tratzberg Castle in the Inn Valley, the emperor would visit as a guest and partake in game hunting in the surrounding forests. After a devastating fire that destroyed the old castle, Tratzberg was rebuilt from the year 1500 onwards, and it's during this rebuild that the Habsburg family tree was created.
So the family tree begins up here with Rudolf I in the fight against Ottokar of Bohemia. That was the famous Battle of the Marchfeld near Vienna, and then goes through the whole hall in 146 figures over the Green Branch and to the next generations to come. Family members are depicted in a blue cloud. It goes to the male offspring. And the brown, I'd like to say golden branches, because I also have two daughters, lead to the daughters, who are depicted with their husbands, and the inscriptions say who they were. And up here, you can see the Emperor Maximilian depicted. There is no inscription underneath, because he was still alive at that time, and to his right is his first wife, Mary of Burgundy, and she is also the mother of his two children, Philip the Fair and Margaret, who were both married in Spain. On the left side, then, we see his later second wife, Bianca Maria Sforza, who brought a lot of gold with her, which Emperor Maximilian had nailed onto the golden roof in Innsbruck. I say that as a joke, of course, because the golden roof was then erected for the wedding.
The family tree ends with sketches of Maximilian's grandsons, the future Emperor Charles V and his sister. Tratzberg Castle is one of the most important Renaissance buildings in Tyrol. However, some of its rooms are still furnished in the Gothic style, such as the Fugger Chamber.
In 1592, Jacob Fugger married the daughter who inherited the castle from Georg Ilsung, the previous owner. The furnishings of the rooms date back to its Gothic beginnings, so partly it is truly Gothic. It has always been here, maybe supplemented now and then, but from 1589 onwards, we know its condition because there is an inventory list. Jacob Fugger was a merchant, so he makes an inventory of what he takes over, and in this inventory the rooms are also designated. For example, this is the chamber of Jacob Fugger, this is the Habsburg Hall, and so on. So the names of the rooms we use today are still from that time. They are all labeled by the inventory list. Based on the furniture in these rooms, you can roughly imagine how the better-off people lived back then. This is a very oversized room, which was always heated with a large tiled stove, mostly from the outside. That's why they are also called backloading stoves. Next to it is a washing table where you can freshen up. And the next room is always the sleeping chamber with chests and wall cabinets. So the furnishings are very different from today. And there was, of course, a lot of staff. We can't reconstruct it exactly, but on the basis of various servants' rooms and kitchens, you can roughly imagine how many people lived here. Certainly 20, 30 minimum, I would say.
Es waren sicher 20, 30, würde ich sagen, mal Minimum.
Another treasure at Tratzberg Castle is Emperor Maximilian's parlor and bedroom. Both rooms are simply furnished and have nothing in common with the expensively decorated, public-facing courtly rooms of the last night. For Maximilian, the proximity to the largest silver mines in the world at the time in Schwaz was also an advantage that Tyrol offered. The mints of the empire, such as those in Vienna or Hall in Tyrol, ensured that the state treasury was always full. The Habsburgs, not only Maximilian I, but many Habsburgs spent more money than they had and repeatedly sold coinage rights to cover their debts. They sold these coinage rights for individual territories to other people and received money back into the state treasury in return. And there have been two particularly important rulers for Austrian coinage. That was Maximilian I and Maria Theresa. It was they who put this coinage chaos back in order and brought the coinage rights back to the Ministry of Finance and standardized them. Hassig Castle in Hall in Tyrol is an important symbol of Habsburg fiscal policy. It is thanks to the Tyrolean Duke Siegmund, who is said to have a dissolute lifestyle, that a mint was founded in there. Friedel with the empty pocket and Sigismund the rich in coins were Tyrolean Habsburg dukes, and they moved the Tyrolean mint from Meran to Hall in Tyrol. Why did they do this? At that time, there was a mountain in Schwaz in Tyrol that consisted almost entirely of silver ore, and this was mined and then used to mint coins in Hall in Tyrol. Today, Hassig Castle is home to a museum where you can see a replica of a coin minting machine from the 16th century. With the water-driven roller minting machine, 4,000 coins could be minted per day. Coinage has developed a lot technically, mainly the machines, but the basic processes have remained the same. So the metal was always melted, coin blanks, so-called blanks, were always produced, and the coin was always struck from these blanks. This is still the case today. Of course, with modern technology, the paths are much more efficient and accurate and careful today. In the past, you really struck a coin, that is...
Blanks were casts, cut out from plates. At that time, children had them inserted into these molds. A mint master then hit this coin with a powerful hammer blow, and then this coin was taken out again. Producing coins was a very difficult and very time-consuming process.
It was not only wars, courtly entertainment, and tournaments that were expensive, but also the maintenance of the court, the expansion of fortifications in Habsburg lands, and a growing empire that devoured large amounts of money. And so there was a mint near the Viennese court, even before the Habsburgs. The Austrian mint was founded in 1194 by Duke Leopold V of Babenberg. And since then, the mint of Austria has always been adapted to the respective ruler's circumstances. So first there was the Babenberg mint, then one of the Habsburg mints, and since 1918, the Mint of the Republic of Austria.
Sind wir die Münzstätte der Republik Österreich.
The most important mints in the monarchy were Kremnitz for the Hungarian part of the empire, then Vienna for the Austrian hereditary lands, and Hall in Tyrol for Upper Austria, and Günzburg in today's Germany was also very important. This is where the first Maria Theresa thaler was minted, so that was the mint that supplied Upper Austria with coins. The Maria Theresian thaler is one of the most successful coins of all time. The portraits of well-known Habsburgs are still among the most popular motifs on the coins of the Austrian mint. In addition, there are limited edition coins on various themes, which are sought-after collector's items. The Habsburgs also recognized the importance of coins as a symbol of rank and power. Particularly precious are medals issued to commemorate certain events without a face value. And once again, with the Habsburgs, the journey leads to Tyrol, to Ambras Castle near Innsbruck, considered the most magnificent aristocratic residence in the country. Ferdinand II of Tyrol had the medieval castle rebuilt in Renaissance style as a residence for his family. Ambras Castle has been famous since the 16th century for its armory, with numerous magnificent cabinets and its unique collection of art and curiosities.
Before Archduke Ferdinand became sovereign of Tyrol, he was appointed governor of the Kingdom of Bohemia and resided in Prague. In all probability, he has already begun to collect in Bohemia. For we know that when he moved from Prague to Innsbruck, very large quantities of armor were brought here.
Die eben hierher gebracht worden sind.
Ferdinand II was considered to be particularly fond of art, and as a Renaissance ruler had an interest in the world and the universe. He had a separate wing built for his collections, such as the Heroes' Armory, which is why Ambras Castle is often referred to as the oldest museum in the world. In addition to magnificent armor and weapons, however, it is above all exhibits from the cabinets of curiosities that still have a disturbing effect today. Pictures of people with deformities or portraits of the Gonzalez family that were displayed at Ferdinand's court. The members of the Gonzalez family were extremely hairy due to a genetic condition and became mainstays at the Habsburg court and lived a life of privilege, at what cost we will not know.
In this collection, Archduke Ferdinand has certainly collected on a small scale what the world also represents on a large scale. And as a prince, he has also made himself, to a certain extent, a creator of this world and everything that the world has produced, whether it has been created by human hands or produced by nature. These two poles, art and nature, play a very, very big role in his collection.
Impressive is a ceiling painting of the starry sky, painted around 1586 by the Italian Renaissance painter Giovanni Battista Fontana. In keeping with the taste of the time, a garden in the style of the Italian Renaissance was also laid out around the castle.
Schloss Ambras ist auch ein
Ambras Castle is also an architectural monument of the Renaissance.
Renaissance, wenn man diesen
Actually, a total work of art of the Renaissance. Archduke Ferdinand had the originally medieval castle of Ambras converted into a Renaissance residence for his first wife, Philippine Welser.
Ehefrau Philippine Welser
He also gave her the castle as a gift,
gemacht.
so that she would be well secured materially for any difficulties.
Materiell gut abgesichert ist.
For a short time, Innsbruck was an important political center of Habsburg expansionism. From here, the imperial house subjugated other countries and created an empire in which the sun never set.